The shackled men were forced to lower their heads and bodies as they were unloaded from buses and taken to El Salvador's mega prison known as the Terrorism Confinement Center, or CECOT.
These haunting footage show the scene. Shackled men, heads bowed, silently marched off U.S. planes and herded into armored convoys. Their destination, El Salvador's CECOT mega prison, infamous for torture, overcrowding, and mass graves. Within hours, they were stripped of their clothes, their names, their dignity, shaved bald, and stuffed into white uniforms. But here's the chilling part. Most had no criminal record. Under a centuries-old wartime law, Trump deported 238 Venezuelan migrants, including asylum seekers, into what some call a death trap. The move has sparked outrage. Legal experts say it bypasses due process entirely, using the dusty Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to justify mass expulsions. Human rights groups warn that detainees in CECOT face brutal conditions. No trials, no calls home, just isolation and abuse. Families haven't heard from their loved ones in weeks. Why is the U.S. sending uncharged migrants into a prison system accused of torture? And more importantly, who's next? Let's explore. During his 2024 campaign, Trump promised a major crackdown on foreign gangs, especially one called Tren de Aragua, with a plan he dubbed Operation Aurora, named after Aurora, Colorado. Why Aurora? Well, it had become home to over 50,000 Venezuelans in less than 2 years, thanks to the refugee crisis, and local police blamed a wave of crimes, kidnappings, shootings, and even prostitution on members of that gang. Trump's camp ran with it, saying the gang had taken over the city, and used that narrative to justify sweeping immigration crackdowns. After he was sworn in again, Trump wasted no time. He signed an executive order labeling Tren de Aragua a foreign terrorist organization, giving his administration the green light to go after them under the Alien Enemies Act. That's when El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, stepped in and basically said, "Send them here." He offered up space in his country's most feared prison, CECOT. This isn't some regular jail, it's a hellish mega prison built specifically to crush gangs. Opened in 2023, it holds up to 40,000 inmates, cramming 80 people in a single cell. There's no visitation, no outdoor time, no rehab, no mercy, just locked doors, metal beds, and bathing with buckets.
Life in the cell in CECOT is the definition of austerity. The bunks are steel. There are no blankets, there are no pillows, there's nothing. It's just a slab of metal. And that's where you sleep. There are no books, there's no television, zero outside communication, nothing goes out, nothing comes in. There's 24-hour surveillance, no misbehaving, no talking.
And while inmates suffer in brutal, inhumane conditions, the guards, they're chilling with full dining halls, break rooms, and a gym. Total opposite worlds. El Salvador's justice minister even admitted the only way people leave CECOT is in a coffin. And sadly, that's not just a dramatic quote. Over 260 people have died in custody since 2022. Human rights groups are calling it out. Amnesty International says the government is running a full-on system of especially against anyone suspected of gang ties under the state of emergency. The BBC even quoted a former UN anti-torture official who said CECOT seems like a way to dispose of people without using the death penalty because not a single inmate has ever been released. This isn't just tough on crime, it's straight up terrifying. And that's exactly where Trump sent 238 Venezuelan men on March 16, 2025. Now, there are serious concerns that some of them were totally innocent. It all began when Trump dropped Presidential Proclamation 10,903, pulling the Alien Enemies Act out of the archives. He claimed the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua had invaded the U.S. and gave the green light for Homeland Security and the DOJ to arrest and deport any Venezuelan migrant 14 or older, so long as they weren't citizens or green card holders and were suspected of gang ties. By Saturday morning, 3 planes had already taken off. 137 Venezuelans deported under the proclamation, 101 more under regular immigration laws, and 23 Salvadorans accused of being MS-13 members. Government footage shows the scene: shackled men, heads down, being marched off planes and loaded into a heavily guarded convoy. Once they reached the prison, their heads were shaved, They were stripped of their identity, thrown into white uniforms, and crammed into overcrowded cells. The US claims these folks are dangerous gang members, but here's the thing: they've shown zero proof. No names, no mugshots, no charges, just a sweeping claim. Out of the 238 migrants labeled gang-affiliated, barely any had serious criminal records. We're talking 5 with felonies, 3 with low-level charges like petty theft or harassment, and 2 accused of smuggling. The rest, mostly just traffic tickets or immigration-related stuff. Nothing even close to what would justify getting locked up in a maximum security prison. Take Andre Hernandez Romero, for example, a 31-year-old Venezuelan makeup artist who ended up in El Salvador. His lawyer, Lindsay Toslowski, says he has no criminal record whatsoever in the US or Venezuela. In fact, she says he fled his country because he was being persecuted for being gay and for his political beliefs. Andre survived the grueling journey through the Darien Gap and made it to a legal border crossing near San Diego, where he applied for asylum. According to Toslowski, he had already cleared the first major hurdle in the asylum process, passing his credible fear interview. That meant US officials had determined the threats he faced back home in Venezuela were real and serious. She told reporters that Andre had a strong shot at winning his case and staying in the US. But then, without any warning, he vanished.
Our client, who was in the middle of seeking asylum, just disappeared. One day he was there, and the next day we're supposed to have court, and he wasn't brought to court.
Then came the shocking part. Andre showed up in photos taken by Time magazine photographer Philip Holsinger, who was on the ground when the group of Venezuelans arrived at El Salvador's infamous mega prison, CECOT. Holsinger said he heard a young man crying out, "I'm not a gang member, I'm gay, I'm a stylist," right before being slapped and having his head shaved. That young man was Andre.
This is a young man that I had followed from the bus who was exclaiming that he was soy gay and saying that he was innocent. And he was, being slapped every time he would speak up, but he just, like he couldn't help himself. Then he started praying and calling out, literally crying for his mother. His crying out for his mother really, touched me.
It's horrifying to see someone who we've met and know as a sweet, funny artist in the most horrible conditions I could imagine.
Unfortunately, Andre's story isn't the only one. Another man, Franco Jose Caraballo Tiapa, a 26-year-old barber and father of 2, was also deported under the same controversial sweep. According to his attorney, Martin Rosenau, Franco had no criminal record and was in the US seeking asylum due to political persecution. He and his wife had actually been released into the US together until everything changed after a routine immigration check-in in February when Franco was suddenly detained. Then came the gut-wrenching phone call. On a Friday night, Franco phoned his wife in tears, panicking and saying he was about to be deported. Shortly after, Rosenau noticed his client's name had vanished from the ICE detainee roster. That typically only happens when someone is either released or deported, meaning, in Franco's case, he was likely already on his way out. In response to all this, a spokesperson from the Department of Homeland Security made a sweeping statement, claiming that even those without criminal records were still terrorists, human rights abusers, gangsters, and more. They just hadn't gotten caught in the US yet. Tom Homan, the administration's go-to guy on immigration, doubled down, saying agents had spent hours conducting intense background checks to verify that each man was tied to Trendy Aragua.
The men and women of ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, who built that manifest, who went to each of these files, spent hundreds and hundreds of hours investigating each and every one of these people, that they are in fact, every one of them, a member of TDA.
But the so-called evidence they used? Pretty flimsy, at least in Andre's case. The only thing they brought to immigration court were photos of his tattoos, specifically a pair of crown tattoos. Authorities claimed those could signal gang affiliation, but Andre's lawyer pointed out that he used to work in the beauty pageant industry, and the tattoos were actually sitting above the names of his parents, likely a personal tribute, not a gang symbol.
The most plausible explanation for that are that his mom and dad are his king and queen.
When asked if there might be classified information that could justify the deportation, she wasn't buying it.
I don't think that that is possible, but if it was possible that they had some information, they should follow the Constitution, present that information, give us the ability to reply to it.
The DHS spokeswoman also claimed on social media that Andre's own social media posts tied him to Tren de Aragua, but reporters dug back through a decade of his online activity and found nothing that even hinted at gang involvement, just more photos, more tattoos, and the same life story that doesn't line up with the government's claims. And as it turns out, this wasn't just happening to Andre or Franco. There were others being labeled as gang members based on little more than vague imagery and assumptions. Take Jersey Reyes Barrios, for example. Immigration officials linked him to Tren de Aragua using a 14-year-old Facebook post where he was throwing up what they claimed was a gang sign. But according to his girlfriend, it wasn't a gang sign at all. It was just a hand gesture he made while repping his love for rock music. Then there was his tattoo, another crown, which immigration agents flagged as suspicious. But what they didn't mention, that same crown sat right above a soccer ball. Jersey used to play soccer back in Venezuela, and his attorney said the ink was actually a tribute to his favorite team, Real Madrid, whose logo, not coincidentally, features a crown. Experts in organized crime have pushed back hard on this kind of logic. With gangs like MS-13, tattoos can be a more clear giveaway, they explained. But Tren de Aragua, that's a different story.
Expert after expert tells us tattoos are not a reliable indicator of whether you're part of this particular gang.
Meanwhile, legal advocates like those at the ACLU are taking the Trump administration to court over these deportations.
It's not a matter of can these individuals be punished. It's a matter of how the government is going to go about doing it. Once we start using wartime authority with no oversight, anything is possible. Anybody can be picked up.
And it's not just theory. It's already happening. Take Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. He had protected legal status here in the US, yet he was still deported to El Salvador on March 15, 2025. The Trump administration later called it an administrative error, but still claimed he was a top MS-13 leader, something Abrego flat out denies. Even though a judge had issued an order blocking his deportation due to the risk of persecution, ICE still detained him and threw him into CECOT. His wife and disabled son, both U.S. citizens, filed a lawsuit calling it what it was, an illegal deportation. Meanwhile, the White House tried to justify it with vague intelligence linking him to human trafficking. But critics aren't buying it. On April 4th, a federal judge ordered the government to bring Abrego back to the U.S., calling the whole situation an illegal act. But the administration now claims it can't bring him back and hasn't made any real effort to fix what they themselves called a mistake. Some serious legal questions are being raised about how the Trump administration is handling this whole operation. Basically, they're using an old wartime law to justify sending Venezuelan migrants, not just out of the country, but straight into a foreign prison. One lawyer pointed out that even during World War II, when the Alien Enemies Act was last used, people were sent back to their home countries, not to prisons in third-party nations.
Even during World War II, Germans had the right to contest their designation under the Alien Enemies Act. As one of the judges pointed out in the appeals court, Nazis had more process than we're giving to these Venezuelan men.
And get this, right before 3 U.S. planes were set to land in El Salvador carrying the deportees, a federal judge, James Boasberg, ordered the Trump administration to stop the flights and bring them back. But instead of complying, flight data shows 2 planes were already in the air and a third was prepping to leave Texas. The administration didn't turn them around. They landed at a military base in Honduras first, and then continued on to El Salvador, directly ignoring the judge's written and verbal orders. And get this, El Salvador's President Bukele went on X, formerly Twitter, and basically mocked the US judge, bragging that 238 of the deported migrants were tied to Tren de Aragua and 23 to MS-13. The next morning, in response to the judge's order, he literally tweeted, "Oopsie, too late," with a crying laugh emoji. Seriously, Trump officials joined in on the trolling. Senator Marco Rubio reposted it. Trump's comms director added a boom clip of Denzel Washington. Even Elon Musk jumped into the mix with emojis. Since then, the US government has gone almost completely silent about the entire operation. The only full list of the 238 deported individuals came from CBS News. In court, the government is now refusing to answer questions, claiming something called the state secrets privilege. That's basically their way of saying they can't even confirm basic details, like where the planes went or why these people were chosen. because it's all supposedly too sensitive. When asked what evidence they had, besides a few tattoos and social media posts tying people like Andre and Jersey to the Tren de Aragua gang, Homeland Security wouldn't answer. They cited ongoing litigation and state secrets again.
We're not going to reveal the operational details of a counter-terrorism operation for quite obvious reasons. We're trying to combat terrorism here in the United States of America.
Meanwhile, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem actually visited the prison in El Salvador recently, but she refused to be interviewed by the media. She did, however, post a video of herself at the facility, standing in front of a cell crowded with Salvadoran gang members, not a single Venezuelan in sight.
But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people.
As part of this deportation wave, the U.S. dropped charges against a high-profile alleged MS-13 leader. Court docs and former officials say this guy might have had dirt on Salvadoran officials. One former federal agent called it a historic loss, saying he could have been a major informant, but now he won't even face justice here in the U.S. According to records obtained by the AP, El Salvador is getting $20,000 for each detainee, adding up to $6 million, with the potential for up to $15 million more. President Bukele claims the money will help fund El Salvador's prison system, which costs around $200 million a year. He's also pushing prison labor under something called the Zero Idleness Program. It's unclear what happens to the 238 Venezuelans who've already been sent there. Bukele said they'd stay for a year, but an internal memo hints they could be held indefinitely, depending on what the U.S. decides. As of now, these individuals haven't been tried in court, aren't showing up in ICE records, and their families haven't heard from them at all. Not a single call or letter since they were flown out. Legal experts like Lee Gallant from the ACLU, someone who's challenged both Republican and Democratic administrations, say what's happening right now is incredibly alarming. When asked what he'd tell the families of these deported men, many of whom are still in the dark about their loved ones' whereabouts, Gallant didn't sugarcoat it.
Will they ever see them again?
I hope so, but there's a real danger that they remain there.
Photographer Philip Holsinger, who actually went inside that prison, described the entire thing as haunting, like witnessing some dark chapter of history unfolding in real time.
They've been stripped of their hair and their clothes, and they don't know where they're going. All of their personality was gone. Your life just ceased to exist. You're just a person in white clothes now. And I had this sort of sense of, I'm watching these guys disappear.
Meanwhile, the U.S. government isn't backing down. Homeland Security officials are saying that even if these migrants don't have any kind of criminal record here in the U.S., that doesn't mean they're innocent. They're still calling them things like terrorists, gang members, even human rights abusers. In court, the government actually admitted that some of these guys have clean records, but then flipped it and said that's exactly why they're so dangerous. One ICE official, Robert Cerna, argued that the lack of a criminal history just means the U.S. hasn't gathered enough intel on them yet. Basically, the logic is, no record equals potential threat, but not everyone's buying it. Andres Antillano, a professor in Venezuela who studies organized crime, says the whole thing feels like a repeat of old-school moral panics, like how Italian immigrants were all painted as mobsters back in the day, or how Cubans got criminalized in the 80s during Miami's drug wars, or even how Central Americans were demonized over MS-13. Antillano thinks the Trump administration is turning poor, working-class Venezuelans into scapegoats and blaming them for things they're not even proven to be part of. But what's your take? Is this just the government doing what it has to do, or are innocent people being used as scapegoats in a political game? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is a conversation we need to have. And if you found this coverage helpful, be sure to check out our other reports. Like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you're always up to speed with the latest updates. There's a lot more coming.